A tiny image from ancient Mesopotamia has been asked to carry an enormous secret. Known today as VA-243, it is not the original cylinder seal, but a modern impression of one, a compact scene in which human figures face each other beneath several symbols. Near the top sits a six-pointed star-like shape surrounded by smaller circles. To ancient-astronaut writers, that cluster looks startlingly familiar. The central shape becomes the sun, the circles become planets, and the whole arrangement becomes evidence that the Sumerians knew a heliocentric solar system thousands of years before modern astronomy. Some versions even count an additional world and connect it to claims about a hidden planet, extraterrestrial visitors, and lost scientific knowledge. But resemblance is only the beginning of an interpretation, not its conclusion. Archaeologists ask different questions. Where did the object come from? What does its inscription say? How were similar symbols used on other Mesopotamian seals, tablets, and monuments? Does the proposed reading fit the visual conventions, religion, language, and astronomy of the culture that made it? That contrast defines our investigation. One method starts with context and comparison, testing an image against a large body of related evidence. The other starts with a modern visual match, then builds a story around it. Both may point to the same cluster of marks, but they do not use the same standards for deciding what those marks mean. So what are we actually seeing? An ancient diagram of the solar system or a familiar Mesopotamian symbol made extraordinary by a modern caption? To answer, we must first return VA-243 to its own world. VA-243 is a small serpentine cylinder seal from the Old Akkadian period, roughly 2340 to 2200 BCE. It stands only about 3.5 centimeters high. Its exact archaeological find spot is uncertain, so claims depending on a known temple, archive, or ritual context outrun the evidence. Today, it belongs to Berlin's Vorderasiatis Museum, where VA-243 is its collection number, not an ancient title. The object itself is a carved cylinder. Rolled across wet clay, it produces a continuous rectangular impression. Most people encounter that impression as a flattened photograph, tracing, or enlarged modern drawing. Those versions make the tiny marks easier to inspect, but they are not the original artifact. Enlargement can sharpen ambiguous dots, regularize damaged lines, and make a compact seal scene resemble a technical diagram. What the seal presents is a standard introduction or presentation scene. A worshipper, apparently carrying a young animal, is led by a protective deity toward an enthroned god. Around them are divine emblems, tools, animals, and the small star and dots motif, later recast as a solar system. The three-line inscription is personal and administrative. Dubsiga, Eli Ilat, your servant, with Eli Ilat generally identified as the seal's owner. It names relationships, not planets. That matters because cylinder seals were working instruments. They authenticated identity, ownership, authority, and transactions, much like a signature combined with an official stamp. Provenance tells us what context is known and what is missing. The inscription tells us whom the object served. Museum cataloging preserves its material, period, and comparative classification. These are essential constraints on interpretation. Without them, an enlarged image floats free from its ancient function and becomes available for almost any modern story.
Mesopotamian sky imagery was a visual language, but not a single timeless code. Artists working in different cities and centuries could represent celestial bodies in different ways, and the same sign might change meaning with its setting. Context matters as much as shape. Stars often appear as pointed rosettes, commonly with 8 rays, though the number could vary. A crescent usually evokes the moon and, by extension, the moon god. Solar imagery could take several forms, but securely identified emblems of the sun god Shamash provide an especially useful comparison. On monuments and seals, his symbol is typically a disk with 4 projecting points and 4 groups of wavy rays between them. It also appears in scenes whose inscriptions, divine figures, or ritual setting independently confirm the solar identification. Other motifs were not necessarily astronomical at all. Horned crowns marked divinity. Animals, standards, weapons, and composite emblems could identify particular gods or express royal and religious authority. A cluster of symbols, therefore, cannot be decoded simply by matching each shape to a modern picture of the heavens. That is the problem with reading the central motif on VA 243 as the sun. It resembles a 6-pointed rosette or star surrounded by smaller dots. Yet it does not match the well-attested Shamash disk with its alternating straight and wavy rays. Nor does the seal label the surrounding dots as planets, or arrange them according to a recognizable ancient astronomical scheme. Specialists test an interpretation by comparing dated examples, inscriptions, find contexts, and repeated conventions. Resemblance begins the inquiry; it does not settle it. On that evidence, the motif is better treated cautiously as a star or divine emblem, not confidently as a diagram of the solar system.
The solar system reading did not come from the seal's Akkadian inscription. It was popularized in the 20th century, most famously by writer Zechariah Sitchin. He identified the large, ray-like central figure as the sun and the surrounding dots as planets. Counting the dots, he argued that Mesopotamians knew a solar system beyond the worlds visible without telescopes. In his reconstruction, one additional world followed a long, looping orbit. He called it Nibiru and linked it to stories of technologically advanced visitors. The argument has an immediate visual appeal. There is a prominent star-shaped object near the center of a cluster, with several circles around it. Seen through a modern astronomical lens, the arrangement can resemble a classroom diagram of planets orbiting the sun. That resemblance is the foundation of the claim. But several steps are added by interpretation. The seal does not draw orbital paths, name the circles as planets, or label the central figure as the sun. Its short inscription identifies a human official, not a celestial chart. Nor do the dots match the planets in their relative sizes, order, or spacing. Scholars generally read the central sign as a star, while the surrounding circles may be decorative fillers or part of a celestial motif whose exact meaning is uncertain. Nibiru also was not consistently a hidden planet in Mesopotamian texts. The word could designate a crossing point and was applied in different contexts to known celestial bodies, especially Jupiter. So the modern claim combines genuine ancient imagery and vocabulary with meanings supplied much later. What is visible is a star-like symbol, a ring of dots, and a presentation scene. A heliocentric system, undiscovered planets, and alien travelers belong to the modern narrative built around them. Now test the claim on its own terms. If the central figure is the sun, the surrounding dots should form a consistent planetary system. But the count is not secure. Depending on which marks are included, grouped, or dismissed as decoration, advocates arrive at different totals. A proposed match works only after deciding in advance which objects deserve to count. Size creates another problem.
The dots vary, but not in a sequence that reliably corresponds to the planet's real sizes. Tiny worlds can appear comparable to giant ones, while supposed planetary order changes according to how the cluster is traced. Position offers no stable solution either. The marks are arranged compactly around the center, as seal composition requires, not along a clear progression of planetary distances. Some readings treat one dot as Earth, another as the Moon, and others as planets or an unknown extraworld. Yet those assignments are selective. A mark that helps the theory becomes astronomical, one that does not may be ignored, reclassified, or explained away. That flexibility makes the pattern difficult to disprove, but also weakens it as evidence. Most importantly, nothing in the design depicts orbits. There are no concentric paths, no orbital lines, and no indication that the dots move around the central object. A ring of small marks around a larger symbol may look suggestive to modern eyes, especially after the solar system interpretation has been supplied. Suggestion, however, is not correspondence. Counting dots can generate a resemblance. It cannot establish what the seal maker intended. Without consistent numbers, proportional sizes, ordered positions, orbital structure, or supporting text, the proposed space map remains a modern pattern imposed on an ancient image.
Mesopotamian scholars did leave extensive records of the sky, and those records look very different from the disputed image on VA 243. Astronomical compendia such as Mul Apin organized stars and constellations into named paths, recorded their risings and settings, and connected celestial cycles with calendars and seasonal work. Later observation diaries tracked eclipses, lunar motion, weather, prices, and the changing positions of planets night after night. The planets were not anonymous dots awaiting modern identification. Scribes recognized the 5 planets visible without telescopes and assigned them established names, divine associations, and categories. Venus, for example, was linked with Ishtar, Jupiter with Marduk. Lexical lists helped preserve this technical vocabulary, while omen series interpreted celestial events within a long scholarly tradition. The system developed over centuries and changed in detail, but its evidence is textual, repeated and comparable across many tablets. Nothing in that surviving tradition clearly describes additional planets beyond those visible to the naked eye, spacecraft arriving from them, or visitors teaching astronomy. Nor does it present a complete heliocentric model in which every planet circles the sun. Mesopotamian observers achieved remarkable mathematical predictions, but prediction alone does not imply modern planetary theory. If the seal truly encoded knowledge so revolutionary, corroboration should appear somewhere else: a planet's recognizable name, a matching list, an explanatory inscription, repeated diagrams, or observations requiring advanced instruments. Instead, the claim depends on assigning modern meanings to one small, ambiguous cluster of marks.
A stronger reading begins with the scene's familiar Mesopotamian grammar. A seated, larger figure occupies the position of authority, while standing figures approach in a devotional or presentation sequence. Rather than astronomers studying a diagram, they resemble a deity receiving worshippers, petitioners, or officials. The star-like form can be read as a divine or celestial emblem, marking sacred status without functioning as a map. This interpretation rests on more than visual resemblance. Akkadian cylinder seals repeatedly arrange figures in audience, introduction, and offering scenes. Deities are commonly distinguished by scale, posture, horned headgear, or associated symbols. Human participants stand before them in ordered ranks.
Details vary, but the composition belongs to an established artistic repertoire. The inscription reinforces that context. It records personal names and a relationship conventionally understood as that of a servant or official. It does not identify the central motif as the sun, list planets, describe orbits, or preserve astronomical instructions. Its language fits the administrative world in which seals expressed identity, status, and authority while authenticating transactions. Dating matters as well. The seal belongs to the Old Akkadian period, while the sophisticated mathematical astronomy sometimes invoked to explain it developed much later. Reading that later knowledge backward into the image adds assumptions the artifact does not require. Together, iconographic parallels, inscriptional context, dating, and related seals support the same general account. Specialists may still debate the exact identities or occasion, but a devotional or administrative presentation explains the scene through conventions abundant in Mesopotamian art. The space map theory must instead redefine a familiar emblem, stabilize an uncertain dot count, and supply meanings absent from the text. Archaeology favors the reading with fewer unsupported steps.
VA 243 does not become less remarkable when we set the spaceships aside. It becomes more human. This small seal carries traces of how people in ancient Mesopotamia represented authority, worship, divine presence, and the ordered world around them. Its figures and symbols belong to a visual culture distant from ours, yet rich enough to reward careful study without importing a modern solar system into the scene. That distinction matters. An interpretation can be imaginable without being demonstrated. Marks can resemble planets, machines, or flight paths to modern eyes, but resemblance alone is not evidence of what an ancient artist intended. Persuasive identification requires patterns that fit the artifact's date, language, artistic conventions, and archaeological setting. VA 243 offers a useful test for any extraordinary artifact claim. First, inspect the original context. What is the object? Where and when was it made? And what its inscription actually says. Second, compare symbols systematically across related objects, rather than selecting only the examples that look supportive. Third, seek independent corroboration in texts, technologies, and other securely dated evidence. Finally, separate possibility from proof. Could a shape inspire a speculative reading? Certainly. Does that establish lost astronomical knowledge or extraterrestrial contact? No. The real wonder is not that an ancient seal secretly anticipated modern space diagrams. It is that a tiny object can preserve a fragment of another society's religious imagination for more than 4,000 years. Archaeology may offer fewer cosmic revelations than the ancient astronaut story, but it offers something sturdier, a disciplined way to let the past remain strange, meaningful, and genuinely its own.